welcome to a very special edition of the Counter Complex. I'm one of your hosts, Tyler. I'm here with some guests.
Well, you're here with another host.
Another host.
And
Okay.
then
I'll
series
be a guest.
regular. Series regular,
No.
yeah. Not necessarily any
regular?
guest here today. Yeah.
Babe, you're you're a
regular.
hostess.
I thought you were saying you're
A hostess Twinkie.
Hostess with the mostess.
Thanks.
Yeah, so today's episode, what we'd like to do is we want to get into some of the nuts and bolts of our theoretical framework, how we understand what it takes to become more authentic, to overcome complexes, to grow into exactly who we are. We want to kind of get into the theory behind that.
So what's a complex? Can we talk about that?
Good
Sure.
question.
All right, so I've got my handy dandy notebook here on the computer. For those of you tuning in again, I encourage you to stick around. We're going to return to some of our regular programming with guests next week, but we want to give everyone, all of our devout fans out there, a way of understanding what it is that the thinking behind our. Can you
Men's
guys
group.
help me out here?
Yeah, the thinking behind the men's group, really.
A men's group, our community, what it is, how it is to become whole, like what's the path and what's in the way of that.
And the way that we understand it.
Yeah.
And we're trying not to get too, intellectual with it. We're going to explain this to the best we can while also staying not overly complex. You see the pun there?
We're not going to get complex about the
Yeah.
complexes.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. This is just one way to do that. This is one way to become more whole and authentic. There are many ways. There are many avenues. But this is just what has worked for us. And it's like a pulling from so many different types of theories, whether they're intellectual or spiritual. I'd say it's a little bit of both, really.
I appreciate that. And the nature of my brain, anytime we talk about stuff like this, I get so passionate about it that as soon as we hit some sort of topic that sounds interesting to me, my brain will just divert in that direction, and I'll lose people. So I'm hoping we can, you guys can offer some bumper rails for me as we start talking about this. So that being said, we'll look here at the nature of complexes. What exactly is a complex? So a complex emerges when one or more of our 7 emotional instincts, care, lust, fear, panic, despair, rage, seeking, or play, are prematurely or illegitimately turned on. Each of these instincts ordinarily develops in harmony with a deeply rooted evolutionary blueprint. Over time, as humans grow and mature, each instinct contributes to our unfolding potential.
How does any of those emotional instincts get prematurely or illegitimately turned on? How does that happen?
So that's a really good question. So one of the examples I always like to use is when we are children and we're raised in families, say, that are troubled.
That have a culture, a specific culture, really.
Yeah.
Not even necessarily troubled, but
Just a family dynamic.
Yeah.
Sure. I'll give one example. It can go. There's so many examples of how this can happen, right? But just for me in particular, my mom and there was an absence of fatherhood and for generations in my family, right? Like my biological father's father wasn't around, and then he wasn't around for his son, and so on forever. My adopted father's father wasn't around, and then he was adopted, and the cycle continued. My mother's father wasn't around, blah, 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 blah. So what there was kind of a deep father wound in which, people didn't feel secure in their own understanding of the world. They didn't have a deep-rooted sense of self. Therefore, when I was born into this family, this energetic pattern, my mother was looking to me in order to feel that sense of self. So what it does is it triggered this early kind of illegitimate care response where I started feeling responsible at a very young age, and not even intellectually, just emotionally. I felt responsible for my mother's well-being. So that care instinct immediately got hijacked, and I started having to care for my mother before I even had received actual care myself.
Mm-hmm.
You mean like like only because I heard you say it before, and I just want clarification for the audience. Like if you weren't okay for any reason, or if you acted out for any reason, and she was afraid of how that might make her look to others as a mother.
Right.
Oh, your
Because
son is acting out. You must be a shitty mom.
yeah.
Something to that effect.
Instead of seeing that her son is acting out and caring for him, it was more like it turned back in on itself, basically.
That, and then I also got ostracized for being authentic. So I threw all of my own inner sense of self away in order to care for my mother's sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened to her, which happened to her mother. And this thing just perpetuates itself. Another example is lust. Say many of us, especially in today's culture, we're pre-exposed to lustful sexual images before puberty, before it's even appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
So these instincts, that lust instincts gets prematurely turned on in a way that then becomes tied to some sort of complex. And we can kind of discuss the versions of that complex. Often in today's world, it's like addiction, shame, all these little pockets that men go into to express this energy of lust without doing it appropriately.
Yeah, and for women too. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, so yeah, if an instinct is activated out of context too soon or under conditions for which it is not suited, the energy of that instinct can become misdirected. Instead of moving us steadily toward our grand purpose, it creates prediction errors, binding us to old patterns rooted in past trauma or resolved emotional content.
So prediction errors being like, if I do this, my mom won't be okay, or if something to that effect, right?
Yeah, like our mind predicts something and then acts on that prediction, even though the prediction is wrong.
Could be like anxiety, right?
Yeah, like fear, right? Like we're saying, oh, I can't do that or else this will happen, even though it's like the very thing that may set us free.
Yeah, which is like a big thing for like anger. Like anger isn't safe. I can't do this, or I can't say that.
Gotta push it down.
Yeah.
My anger is not okay.
If I express my anger, then they might not accept me. I might be outcasted and left behind by the group.
Yeah. Good girls don't get angry.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's right. So that's kind of the basic rundown of a complex, and it gets into, more of this, and it goes very deep. There's many layers here. But when a complex is formed, what it does is it kind of pulls the energy away and keeps it safe and innocent in order to save the energy of the instinct. It keeps it safe in order to not be traumatized over and over again by this external stimuli, whatever it was that caused it to begin with.
Yeah. So what you're touching on here is like a really good key point that we must flesh out. Like the way that we see complexes are actually, they're like their own living organism. They kind of have a mind of their own. And they don't care if they're right or wrong or whatever. Their only goal is to keep you safe, keep you alive.
That's right. And we typically, and it gets really bad to the point where we identify with them. So when we go to confront these things in other people, it's often met with harsh resistance because it comes off as an attack
on the personality.
Yes. Yeah. And many people know this, right? Like when we see something in someone that we love, we're like, man, they're just dealing with this thing and I wish I could set them free. But the moment you start speaking on it, they react to you as if you're an enemy, and then they attack you, right? They're like, oh, fuck you, because their sense of self is threatened.
Yeah, it's wrapped up in their complex. They don't know the difference between their authentic self and the complex. It's very...
And that's kind of where the word trigger comes from. Because the complex is triggered, and all of a sudden it comes online. The complex is fully online, and the intellect leaves the room. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, that's where that comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And ultimately, when we receive information like this, especially people who are very interested in awakening and letting go of these things, sometimes what the mind can do, because the intellect is a bit of a trickster and it serves on behalf of the complex a lot of times, is it will use the information that's receiving even here to just further embolden itself. And that's why it's always a matter of going towards the places we actually avoid or don't want to go. That's why it's always a matter of going toward the very thing that feels unsafe. And that's the the paradox of this whole journey.
Mm-hmm.
So, awakening the 7 instincts. So, this theory is also based on a couple of different, there's a guy named Jacques Panksepp. He did some groundbreaking research in his book called Affective Neuroscience. It came out in like 1998. It was based on his research in the 70s and 80s, where he actually mapped out the systems within the body for each of these 7 instincts. So, the 7 instincts are fear, lust, rage, care, play, seeking, and then panic and despair. And then kind of built on his back, that a lot of this is based out of, there's so many layers of psychology here. Jungian theory. This guy, Donald Cowshed, in his book called Trauma and the Soul, he illustrates how severe trauma can disrupt or distort these core drives. He calls it a self-care system may form within the psyche, carrying parts of these instincts into hidden complexes to protect a child's innocence from overwhelming pain, like we were saying.
Mm-hmm.
While protective, these complexes can freeze or bury the instincts, waiting for a time when they can safely reclaim them. Healing thus involves facing these complexes and reintegrating the very energies meant to guide us, fear, rage, and more, back into the flow of life. So what I like to mention is that the reason why the emotions are everything is because the emotions and the instincts are primary. They come before the intellect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem is that a lot of us identify with the things we think. We think that we can just think our way into things and think our way into healing. In fact, cognitive behavioral therapy is based on that assumption that thinking is primary, that you can kind of think
your way into better emotions
and plan all the tools of the intellect to try to get to a better feeling state. And, not to say they haven't had success. Obviously there has been some, but the theory to me makes sense that the instincts are primary. And what we're often experiencing is a mental state that is an expression of blocked instincts or traumatized instincts, right?
Tyler,
go ahead.
I'm just going to throw it out there just in case. Like when we say that the feelings are primary, we mean they come before the thinking.
Right.
They come before the thinking. And you could see this like when you are triggered, after the trigger usually happens and you like emotionally kind of lash out, you go, oh my God, like where did that even come from? Like I couldn't have even stopped that if I had tried. I couldn't have thought my way out of that trigger. I was just like immediately my emotions were on the moment you said that and there was no going back. Like you can't think your way through like a strong trigger. So I just wanted to highlight that.
I'm glad. Please say more because this is great.
Yeah. Well, I'll touch on that last sentence there where he says healing thus involves facing these complexes and reintegrating the very energies meant to guide us. And something that one of our mentors and friends, Michael, he said it very well, and I liked it when he said it. He said that we must go back into the same emotion or the same feeling in which created the complex.
That's
so
right.
Let's say it was like some overwhelming, painful event, like, well, I don't know. Let's say you saw your mother getting beaten by your father, and it created something within you, and then all of a sudden you have a dissociation. Anytime there's any kind of anger or violence or anything, now you have this trigger of you fight or flight or whatever it is. And this could be a poor example. I don't know, but so then healing that would mean going back to the exact same emotion that you felt when you were experiencing that as a 10-year-old or when at whatever age you were, and sitting with the discomfort, feeling it, and really fleshing it out. And oftentimes, I'll say every time, what lies at the center of our suffering is joy. Whatever that looks like for you, that's completely different for every person. But the biggest suffering one can experience is the avoidance of suffering. And so So, I don't want to go off on a tangent either here, but
Sure.
but the biggest, I just want to touch on that is that.
Well, I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of relate it to one of my stories. So when we were doing this work, we got into this. So when I was a child, right? I was like 10 or 11 years old. We had moved in next to these neighbors. These neighbors had kids, and they were good friends of ours. And there was this experience. There was other kids that hung out with us too, where one of those other kids had stolen something from the neighbor's house. So our neighbors, our friends, they accused me of stealing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had actually convinced my family that I was indeed guilty of this crime.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at that time when I was going through that there was this deep, intense, heavy feeling of rejection and loss, as though I was being ostracized from the tribe and that I was seen as guilty and shameful and dirty. And there was this loss of what I felt was innocence. Like I had lost the sense of bond and family and trust, that the being I was no longer recognized as what I really thought I was.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's total incongruence. And it was very traumatizing. I didn't realize to the depths of how traumatizing it was. And what I realized, because when we were going through this work, I had developed an entire personality structure about avoiding that pain.
Mm-hmm.
I had kind of, built up this person that was totally upfront and honest. And in a way, what I would do is I would be almost overly honest. Like I would tell people things that probably were best served my private life.
Mm-hmm.
Like just things that weren't necessarily meant to be shared. And it was all in an effort to kind of maintain this sense of safety and connection with people. And what's interesting is that behavior, by virtue of some of the mentor we were working with and some of these other people, it had created this tift, this argument in which we had gotten into this place where suddenly then everybody was mad at me, and I felt like I was being accused of something that I wasn't doing, that I was somehow made the enemy, made the person that had caused all the disruption in the community. And I felt that exact same trauma, It turns out that what's so beautiful about this, what's so spiritual about this work, is that what I realized that the entire universe was conspiring to bring me back to that emotional point.
Mm-hmm.
So that, because what was beautiful is in that moment of potential loss of the community, it was you guys, that came to me and says, you know what, man, I'm looking at the facts and you're right. And
then we trust you.
And you trust me. And I remember the deepest, I wept. I mean, I wept, and everything hit me like a fucking ton of bricks. Like I knew exactly why that happened, that it was a spiritual experience, that it was related to that trauma, and that what I had been begging for years was the sense of being seen and recognized and trusted.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like what's so wonderful about this is that what I realized, and this is where it gets really spiritual, is that it's the entire universe, all these energies, these instinctual energies, because of the laws of vibration and how we pull things into our experience by virtue of the vibration we're holding.
Mm-hmm.
If that trauma is there, it's pulling that trauma to
Back
you.
in. Mm-hmm.
And you see this when people go into the same relationship patterns over and over and over again, right? They keep pulling the same pattern back to them over and over again. But what they keep doing is the complex is using it to rehash the trauma, to reinforce the idea that I'm a victim of this person because of what they did to me. They abandoned me. Look at that. Meanwhile, their personality structure, as a result of trying to avoid that trauma, was creating a scenario where that person had to abandon them because they couldn't possibly hold that for them.
Mm-hmm.
So what that event did is it communicated to me that the entire universe was conspiring to bring this pain into my life again so I could experience the opposite, the healing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're touching on a really good point too, because that's, sorry, let me make an I statement. I have heard a number of times in the past where people say like, oh, I can't trust anyone. Nobody's trustworthy, or like you said, everybody leaves at some point.
Yeah.
Even my own father
Always,
left me.
men always cheat.
Right.
Men are cheaters.
Exactly. And they have this story that they identify with. All the meanwhile, not realizing that they have the ability to break out of that story, right? Out of that narrative. If they were to, just give a little bit of trust, and then they would see, and putting trust into the right people, of course, but it's not so much finding somebody, because let me say, you actually got really lucky in this scenario that you had two people outside of you to help you.
Yeah, but what I realized, the universe constructed that whole thing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Like it was
100%.
luck. I don't know if I hear you, but
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is, some people, they have to heal whatever the complex looks like. If it's like trust issues, they're gonna have to learn to trust in God.
Right.
They're gonna have to trust the grand design. They're gonna have to learn how to trust that even if this person does betray their trust, that they're going to be okay. And so that's
great.
Yeah, and
That's really good.
Right. So,
Yeah, because if the only way to learn to trust, because like here, what I'll say is that one of the things that in Course in Miracles it says is that the characteristics of God's teachers are that they trust unconditionally. And so what happens is if we're traumatized in the form of like distrust, like someone broke our trust, what happens is that creates this complex to where we're always looking for exactly that same scenario to break our trust again. So how can we learn to trust, but by trusting when that happens? How can we learn to trust unconditionally, but by learning to trust even when that happens, that it's all for our divine, it's for a divine purpose. It's greater than that. It's greater than beyond that.
It's happening because there's something you need to learn about it. Yeah. Well, a more specific scenario is like a woman is cheated on by her boyfriend. And then so she leaves that relationship and she says, well, I don't want to get into another relationship because men cheat. Exactly. And really the medicine would be to get into another relationship.
That's well said.
And just trust it, and just trust that there is an opportunity for somebody to prove you wrong. For you to be wrong.
That's well said. And that she can learn to trust herself. She could trust her intuition.
Trust her judgment on people's characters. Trust in God that even if she does get her heart broken, she's going to be okay. It's the medicine is going towards the thing that you're the most afraid of.
Yeah.
So one of the big reasons that we think this is so important, why do we need to wake up the instincts? Well, instincts are often suppressed, shamed, or exploited. So one of the problems we're seeing in the world, we're in a kind of a paradox. And one of the most abundant times on earth, we have almost everything we need all the time. But also one of the most spiritually, emotionally, and kind of inauthentic times of our life, where we're all kind of, stuck behind computer screens, chasing, shallow reward loops, disconnected from each other, no sense of community, no real tribe. And then we're also kind of ruled by an oligarchy where we're very susceptible to, powers beyond ourselves. We think that we're small, just leaves in the wind being tossed around. And our experience kind of confirms that when we feel that way and when we think that way. And what we're saying here is that the instincts, when integrated, help us to reclaim that sense of sovereignty within us, that connection to God, where we really feel the inner aliveness and freedom that is like a natural inheritance of our existence,
our humanity.
So fear, for example, gets hijacked to manipulate or denied until it morphs into deep anxiety and control, right? People can use fear against us if we don't know what fear is and we don't know how to use it.
Yeah, if we don't understand that it's actually a guardian.
A guardian, a threshold, and an illusion. Right? So lust is commodified, right? Overshadowing its deeper potential for connection and creation. So lust energy itself is the energy of creation. You think about the male bird that builds a beautiful nest to attract mates. We all us men, especially men, we are building things to attract mates. We're building a better world, a more trust and grounded society, a more secure society. for our women, when our lust is hijacked, the energy behind that instinct is stunted. And now a lot of us, 95% of men are addicted to porn? Something like that. I don't know. So crazy number. We can look it up. I don't know.
Yeah, we'd have to source
It's
that.
a lot. There's a lot of men that are addicted.
What are you guys
by
doing?
Yeah.
It's
Jeez.
addicted?
It's
Not just view it, but addicted?
It's pretty bad. So I don't know the numbers. So
Wow.
forgive me. We can maybe look it up.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do it right now.
Yeah. Let's see. Or we just go throwing numbers out there into the
men.
interwebs of the world.
Well, I'm sure that there's men that aren't going to be honest about that. So it's
The other 5%.
It's going to be hard to.
Okay, so saying, okay,
Oh, giggity.
69%.
How ridiculous.
If that isn't a cosmic joke right there, huh? That's pretty good. 69%.
Yeah, so Pornhub reported more than 2 billion visits in a single month in 2023.
2
Wow.
billion.
2 billion.
That's a lot.
69% of American men and 40% of American women view online porn each year. Yeah.
Oh, well,
That's viewing.
That's viewing. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I
it's
don't
a lot
know.
of people.
It's going to
a
be
lot of
hard
people.
to. It's going to be hard to. Yeah.
Quantify that, right?
Quantify addiction.
So what happens is that energy loop turns into, rather than an urge for creation, it becomes this shallow loop of wasted energy, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And then we're lost in kind of a fantasy world where we actually believe that we're sleeping with beautiful women and seemingly satisfied by it.
Or women going on OnlyFans and commodifying their bodies, for money, and it losing the sacredness of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Rage is either violently unleashed or locked away in resentment or guilt, leaving ourselves vulnerable. So rage is one of those really important instincts that protects what's sacred.
Well,
our
rage
families.
is so bad. Rage is a bad thing.
So
Anger
people shouldn't
is
feel any
bad. You
rage.
should push it down.
Yeah.
Should never be angry.
Well, and that's really what's so difficult about rage is that the more it's suppressed, the more it violently erupts,
Yeah.
and then the more we look at it as an enemy,
Mm-hmm.
and so we further push it down.
Yeah, and rage, it's synonymous with so many other words that you could use if it makes you feel more comfortable, right? Like,
Or anger.
yeah, just anger, like righteous anger, like we were discussing in one of our last episode, right? We were talking about, righteous anger. The ability to dip in of it and dip out of it whenever, having it fully online so that you're not suppressing it until you blow up on somebody. But if somebody crosses a boundary, you don't even, like, rage or anger doesn't even have to be like, you're standing up or raising your voice or anything. It's just like hey, I don't like that. Please don't do that again.
Well, and I like the word rage. It identifies it by its most extreme expression, right?
Yeah.
Like rage in a moment where your family's being attacked. Rage is appropriate.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fullest expression of rage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and then there's subtler versions of it, right? When you just kind of stand up, like you imagine, what's the guy, Milton from Office Space or Office?
Yeah, the red stapler guy.
The red stapler guy, right?
Yeah.
He's an example of suppressed rage. When every time they took his stapler, he just needed to subtly go, "No, give me my fucking stapler back, bro."
Yeah, but he
Like-
didn't again
he
and
didn't.
again and again. Then he burned the whole place down. Spoiler.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
All right, now care is undervalued, leaving many feeling burnt out or unsupported. A really good example of a care instinct being hijacked is this idea of codependency, right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea of like sacrificing ourselves for the needs of others, kind of Stockholm syndrome, where we're like caring for the very systems that suppress us and oppress us.
Caring for somebody with problems, so much so that it turns you into a martyr. Meaning, like, for an example, an alcoholic mother, and so their kids often are the ones left responsible for having to care for her. So much so that it turns them into the martyr. It's at the detriment of their own well-being,
Mm-hmm.
and that happens often. It happens often with people with addictions, and even without addictions, if they're just
Yeah,
it
even
can easily
even moms
hijack.
just like taking care of everyone in the family but themselves to the point of, burnout, and their children leave their home and they have no idea who they are without their kids. That's a really common one.
Well, it's really bad too if a mother is overly caring for her children to the point where she doesn't let them learn the things the hard way,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you're kind of loving them into the ground, as someone once told me.
Yeah, I guess that's overcaring though, right? Or like,
Yeah, well,
like a
that's the-
seeming over.
There's
that's the
overcaring,
other
undercaring. Yeah.
The
So
other
the
example.
so the example here where it says care is undervalued, leaving many feeling burnt out or unsupported. That happens a lot in the business arena. You know, like,
Yeah.
hey, I don't care if you're sick or not. You got to come to work. I don't care if you just became a father. You got 2 days of paternity leave, and you got to get right back to work. You know, always worried about the bottom line. And so a lot of people do feel burnt out. They feel unsupported. They don't feel cared for.
And I think overcaring will leave you feeling burnt out too.
For sure.
Overcaring.
There's just
So-
two different sides of the same coin.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Exactly. So then next is play. So play is often brushed aside as childish, stifling our inner innate wonder and joy. So play is the instinct that allows us to learn and socially develop. Right?
Mhm.
Like play is very important. We learn the fastest when we're playing.
Yeah.
The nature of play is often lost because we're often taught that the only thing worth doing is that which produces something like money,
Mhm.
results.
Even this is a form of play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Totally.
Anything, anything creative, anything, that's like playing music, drawing,
Right.
anything like that,
Yeah,
Often-
doing
and
something
I-
for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. You know, what we can all see is that like the only play left in our bones is like video game play.
Mm.
Yeah,
You
which
know?
is fun.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun, but everything else kind of, like you said, just kind of gets brushed aside.
Well, and
we
I
even,
kind of
we even could get called childish, like well, it's just like you said right there.
well, it's part of that. It's
Seeing
part of that
seeing
whole
as childish.
complex, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, but to kind of follow up on that, seeking is the next instinct, and this one's to me very particular or special because seeking is really one of those things that leads to severe addiction. Seeking is dulled by endless distraction and addiction, curbing our thirst for genuine discovery. So seeking is this reward system that rewards you for chasing, not for arriving, not for acquiring, but it's the thing that makes effort feel good. And
Yeah.
that's what dopamine is, right?
Yep.
And what happens is that it's almost like we're in this world where there's nowhere to explore anymore, is often what's felt.
Mhm.
Now that's not always the case. Obviously, there's plenty of healthy examples of seeking as an expression of expansion.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes that instinct kind of loops in on itself and becomes addictive behavior.
Yeah,
Mhm.
a really good example of seeking that isn't it's like this hijacked or addictive behavior or anything dull is like an entrepreneur. Seeking their and it goes. I'll tell you, my entrepreneurship with my business. I own an exterior cleaning company. It feels like play.
What's that exterior?
Exterior cleaning, window cleaning, pressure
Yeah,
washing.
no, what's
those
it
kinds
called?
of
What's it
things.
called? What's
Oh,
the name?
curb appeal.
Oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Curb appeal.
Shameless plug.
Curb appeal exterior
Shameless
cleaning.
plug.
I got to send you the logo to put right here. Right?
Bam.
I feel like if you dive into any of this content that we're putting out, you'll see that the seeking instinct is correlated with the third eye chakra, and I'll tell you, it feels like my third eye is wide open, and every day I feel like I'm in play. I feel like I'm playing. Yeah, exactly. My vision is wide open. I can see exactly where I'm trying to go, where I'm going, not trying. And because of that, because I'm living my fullest expression of my highest excitement, there's nothing that's a drag. Like no part of it do I have to do. I get to do all of it. So
Yeah, and by the way, each of these instincts does correlate with one of the chakras too, which we'll get into. But this whole course that we're developing is about. And then the last one, this one's really intriguing to me. The last one is panic and despair, which often can be called, you can call it grief as well. But this is you can call it the crown chakra, right? And it's often thought, well, I thought the crown chakra is synonymous with enlightenment. Well, what's interesting about the panic and despair or grief instinct is that it's often dismissed as weakness instead of recognizing it as a protective alarm system and spiritual portal, right? So it's the place where at the end of the road, a lot of us drop down on our knees and pray because we have this existential crisis, this feeling of abandonment. So I love the story of the hippo, right? The baby hippo that's in its nest and it wakes up after a nap and realizes its mother is gone. Panic overwhelms it, screams, makes a bunch of noise to try to call back its caregiver. When that fails, immediately it goes into what one of our mentors discussed. His name is Michael Walker, by the way. I'm going to give a real plug to him real quick. He has this really, no, let me go back to that. Okay. Hold on first. Okay. The hippo calls out for its mother when it notices it's gone, panics, yells to bring the caregiver back. As soon as the caregiver doesn't come back, it immediately goes into a survival strategy called despair, right? This is kind of the grief portal that a lot of us go into. Gets very quiet. Gets internal. It goes into a quietness. Our mentor, Michael, he's talking about how this is often thought of as he thinks of it as a withdrawal, like from natural opiates that we experience during connection. It's like all of those leave the body and you just go into withdrawal. So that there's a hormonal system behind this thing that causes you to be quiet so that none of the predators roaming will find you, right? You go into this withdrawal. And it's the same experience that many of us experience like at the end of our spiritual rope, where we have nothing more to grab onto in the world that's satisfying or that's bringing us what we're actually looking for, which is a deep sense of meaning and connection. And we go into that panic, despair, grief, or we lose a loved one. Mm-hmm. And then we have these, we can often have these, this is where the energy kind of loops in on itself and goes back to the bottom and fear. And you get that Taurus energy field. And then that's the state of enlightenment, which includes all of the emotions: fear, lust, rage, care, play, seeking, panic, and despair. And it's all connected. Mm-hmm. And that in itself, that whole entirety is what love is.
It's the human experience.
Love isn't just one emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Love is all of them held at once, right? So that panic and despair portal is very interesting connection.
I like to think about it like it's the despair is like the realization that you've somehow been cut off from your higher power, which isn't true. It's not actually true, but in that state, like that's what we're truly longing for, is that connection with our higher power.
I think that's beautifully said. You kind of broke up on the audio there at the end. You said connection to our what?
Our higher power.
Yeah.
Yeah. I identify with this one quite well, with the panic and despair. I lost my mom. I'm sure, you guys know. For some of the audience, some of you guys know, some of you don't. 3 years ago, I lost my mom. And it was absolutely panic first, and then the despair. Much like the hippo in this example, I was calling out for my mom. And then once I realized that she wasn't coming back, she wasn't responding, the despair set in, and I sat for about an hour in silence. And it was just, when something like that happens, you don't really know what to do next. Like the EMTs came, took her away and all this stuff. And it's just, and then you just sit, and it's like, okay, I should call someone, but then I can't even get the words out of my mouth right now. It's a very interesting thing. It's hard. It's very hard, but there's, I see a big correlation with that, with like how one would even experience death would be like the fear of dying. Oh my God, I'm dying. Okay, fine. Mm-hmm. I'm dying. And then when you finally accept it, you face like the nirvana, the kiss of death, and then it could be something quite beautiful, or it could be terrifying. It's like your own level of resistance to death,
I almost feel like there needs to be like a panic, despair, and then oneness.
Yeah,
right.
And then it's like panic, opposite. Despair, oneness, and then it starts over again. That you with fear, because you fear that you're going to lose that oneness. And then it loops in on itself again. That's how I picture it in my mind.
And like a higher octave,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's difficult because we talk about it in a linear fashion, but this thing is kind of beyond linear, right? It's this whole thing. Mm-hmm. I remember in some of my deep, profound, high-dose psychedelic experiences where all this makes sense, where I experienced the whole gamut, the whole breadth, the whole
all
spectrum.
The emotions.
Yeah, the whole spectrum.
Yeah. The duality of it all, like the despair and the joy all at once.
Yeah, like the the despair of how beautifully tragic and fragile life is, and then the cosmic joke of how it's all eternal anyways.
Exactly.
It's like the whole gamut.
Yeah. I feel like a really great movie that kind of highlights that idea is Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I love that.
It's a
I still
phenomenal
haven't seen that movie.
It's
You
so
haven't
good.
seen that?
I've seen so much about it. And
I'm so excited for you to watch
Oh,
that.
It's
I
so
can't wait.
good.
I
So
know. I
good.
wanted to see it so badly, and then I haven't watched it.
It's like, and
Thanks for the reminder.
and even with while you're viewing it, like you're like crying and laughing at the same time. Like it's so
It's
funny and tragic at the same time. It's such a beautiful movie.
Wow.
It's one of the few movies that's able to do that. Like you're crying and laughing at the same time. It's really, really good. Really, really good.
That'll be next on the list.
Do it, Daniel, do it.
So that being said, here at the Counter Complex, what we've been working on very ferociously is developing a course and practice invitation into exploring all of these. And they're laid out right here. There's been a lot of work going into this, and it's still almost done here. But soon we're gonna release this. It'll be behind a small paywall, but I think it's worth every penny. And if you want to kind of expand some further knowledge, we have a really good friend, as we mentioned, sort of a mentor of ours and dear friend, Michael. He has this Jaguar Marigold Chapel where he writes a bunch of blogs, very accessible material here that you can look into if you want to kind of explore a little further. Also, some really great books. Trauma and the Soul by Donald Cowshed is worth checking out. What else in regards to this? Let's see. Affective neuroscience is a little more sciencey, but that book in particular really kind of helped me to start wrapping my head around this.
The book Untethered Soul is also a great way to start kind of exploring these ideas of like a complex.
That's a great starter book because it's easily
Yeah.
digestible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I like that. I sometimes gravitate towards the more intellectual stuff, but I love all those books as well. Yeah. Okay. Anything to add?
What's your guys' favorite your favorite instinct?
Lust. What's up, baby? Talking to you. Not you. Not you. You know who you are.
Lust is great. Lust is a really good one.
I do enjoy a good lust experience. I seeking to me has been one that is very fulfilling when it's been healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say seeking is actually my favorite. Yeah.
I'd say play for me because I definitely had to I grew up really fast and childhood was really serious and dark. And so for me, play is like, amazing.
Play's a good
So
one,
dancing
too.
around,
Quit
Man,
playing, girl.
I feel like
doing
those are
karaoke,
those both are like number one. Play and
play
seeking.
and seeking.
Both number one.
Yeah.
Number one and A.
I'll tell you what, I've had some good rage moments before.
Yeah.
I will say that when the moments where I've expressed rage in its free, like healthy way, it feels amazing to actually step into that. I think that was cut off from me from a young age, but there are times where even certain coworkers or administrators at my job had like violated a boundary of mine, and I like kind of rage out a little bit, and it feels good because I know that when the Guardian's online, that the message that God would use me to communicate can get through.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel a sense of, okay, I can protect myself, and that I don't have to be afraid.
Mm-hmm. You have your own back.
I think, yeah. And so there's value in all these, even though the play and seeking and care and things like that tend to feel nice. There's so much value in these darker ones as well. And like passing through the fear threshold. There's nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like crossing through that boundary.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what would you say? Okay, because this is a couple of guys, and we got a woman here, but we've been heavily geared towards men, seeing as that we're a men group. But what would you say to someone who says that the things that we are promoting here are like toxic masculinity? Like for us saying that, like you need to have your rage online, and because we've
We've run into
we've
that.
run into it. We've heard it. And
Well, we've been labeled.
we've
right?
been
That's
labeled,
what
We've
it
been
is.
labeled as a
masculinity.
toxic masculine.
What I would
group.
say is that their expression of that term towards us is an expression of their rage. So congratulations.
Yeah, you know, it's
Mhm.
funny. I had that. I experienced, or I was told that we were toxic masculinity, and I was told that directly in front of my wife. And
You were?
yeah, my wife was there. Well, it was when you conveyed it to me. Linda was
Oh,
there.
got it.
Yeah. And you know, she just laughed. You know, she laughed, and she was
Mhm.
like, "If she goes, you have nothing to worry about." And I go, "No. I know what I am. Like I know that I am not toxic in any sense. You know, and you know, yeah, so much has healed within our marriage and in my professional life, in my personal life, with my parenthood, with my parents, you know, like
Mhm.
it's healed generations going both ways.
Mhm.
And so for somebody to say that it's toxic, it's like, well, just look at the proof in the pudding, you know, look at like where I was and where I am now. It's just, I just don't even have to defend myself. You know, I always go back to the example of like, how does the Course in Miracle say? They say, what is
You're talking about the intro?
yeah.
What is real cannot be threatened. What is unreal does not exist.
Herein lies the peace of God.
Therein lies the peace of God.
Yeah, so I know what I am, and I know that like for me to be called toxic in any way is just so untrue. It would be as if somebody said that I hate your blue beard, right? I know that I don't have a blue beard, so I wouldn't need to defend myself,
Yeah.
you know? So there's no defense needed. And that's one of the key things that we always say is like, you know, truth should be able to stand up to anything.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that we see a lot of times with these complexes. If there's any push back or if there's any leaning into something, they get extremely upset. They put up walls and they're like, nope, we're not even going to go there.
I think that's a good sign because I think it means that we're bumping up against things that people aren't, you know, maybe necessarily prepared to look at. I think that
Mhm.
when we're doing anything meaningful, that we're going to have the things, the mechanisms, what do you call it, complexes or whatever it is, that serve to keep the old way intact.
Mhm.
They're going to be coming against us, right?
Mhm.
They're going to be doing what they're programmed to do, which is to defend the
They're complexes.
the complexes of society.
Yeah.
Right? These things
Yeah.
in society that have enabled horrible things to happen.
Mhm.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
that's one of the interesting things that you'll see once you start looking at, you know, complexes for what they are. You'll see that it's not such a unique personal thing. It because we're all one society. It's really turned into like societal complexes.
Mhm.
Totally.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
express.
And, you know, and just like we talked about at the beginning of this podcast about how like there's like a big issue with men like father figures being absent. You know, that's like a societal thing that's happening. There's also a societal thing that's happening where a lot of women are very hurt and suspicious of men. You know, probably because of the lack of like healthy father figures in our culture. And so, of course, like women, we've got a lot of complexes around what men are. And, you know, we can see masculinity as threatening because we don't understand it or because our complexes are trying to protect us. So it makes sense that, you know, there's women that are, you know, seeing bits and pieces of your guys' content and they're bumping up against, you know, their complexes. So, you know, it's just an invitation to look at, okay, what are my belief systems around men, you know?
Yeah, you know, you bring up a really well, you know, yeah, you didn't necessarily bring it up, but you kind of triggered the thought inside of me. But what you're kind of touching on is that it all really makes sense. Like all of our complexes.
Oh, they make perfect sense.
Perfect sense.
Yeah.
There's no judgment. So like,
Yeah.
of course women feel the way that they do towards men because
course.
men haven't been showing up properly, right? And like, of course, all the things. Like Tyler, of course, your complex made perfect sense because of the way that you were raised, and of
but
course,
you're saying that if the survival strategy is showing up, that it can often cover over or miss the opportunities to have that be undone.
Yes.
Like a woman who doubts men will not trust a trusting man,
Exactly.
a trustful man, right? Yeah, you're saying.
Yeah, and she'll point the finger and say you are not trustworthy when it's her that is untrusting.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I just invite, anyone who has those feelings to just look a little deeper,
Or at least
we're all playing a part. Or comment, subscribe.
Yeah, just leave a comment. Like, let us know how you really feel. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, we'd love to.
We're not afraid of that, Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, this has been the Counter Complex. Thanks for tuning in.
Peace.